Hey, how's it going? It's Sean Bradshaw from Cyberfret.com, and in this lesson I'm going to go over some of the fundamentals of a technique called sweep picking. Now, a lot of times when people think about this technique, they think about shred metal, fast, virtuoso playing, but sweep picking is actually done in a lot of different styles, from blues to jazz, and so it's not always that, necessarily that fast flurry of a bunch of different notes, but it is a way to get a few quicker notes to sound by playing on some adjacent strings, and we'll take a look at that here in just a second. Now, to kind of start off our sweep picking journey here, we're going to start off by just kind of playing a chord on the first three strings. And so what I want you to do is take your first finger, put it on the first string at the 5th fret, your second finger on the second string at the 6th fret, and your third finger on the third string at the 7th fret. This is actually a D minor chord. And what I want you to do is we're just going to strum those three strings. Now, as I'm doing this, as I'm strumming this chord, one thing I'm doing is kind of rolling my pick across the strings rather than just trying to play all of those so that you're hearing them simultaneously. I'm kind of rolling my pick so you kind of hear those three notes a little bit more individually. Now, once you've got that idea of playing this chord and kind of rolling your pick across the strings, you've got the basic idea of what you're going to be doing for a sweep pick. But for sweep picking, instead of hearing all of those notes ringing together, you're going to be playing them so that they're more individual. All right, so that's the general idea. If you were just going to play those three notes and pick them, you might do something like that. And if you look for my right hand, you're seeing this kind of articulation of each note like that. But for the sweep pick, what you're doing, I'm letting my pick kind of cross over to the next and rest on the next string, and I'm just making this kind of smooth downward motion like I'm strumming, like I'm doing this kind of roll strumming. All right, so that's the first exercise that I want you to do, is first play this kind of small D minor chord on the first three strings. First practice kind of strumming it so that your pick is kind of slowly strumming that, so you're hearing the notes a little bit more individually. And then all you're going to do is, instead of having all of those three of those fingers down at the same time, we're just going to be going one note at a time. Your third finger, second finger, and then first finger. But as far as what your right hand is doing, it's exactly like you're strumming. All right? So that's the general idea of this sweep pick. We can get these three notes fairly fast because we're just making that one downward motion with the pick. And so if you were trying to play those same three notes and trying to do like a down-up pick or something, there's a kind of a limit as to how fast you can get those going. But here, we can get a flurry of those three notes very quickly from just that one downward motion. All right. Now, next, what I want you to do is kind of the same thing. We're just going to take this little small D minor chord, and this time we're going to do an upward motion. And at first, let's just hold all of those fingers down and do this like you're strumming a chord. So you're hearing all of those notes ringing together. And then work on doing it so that you're hearing those individually. Now, one thing I am doing with my right hand that it helps kind of control any excess noise that might be going on is, instead of kind of holding my hand in the air like this, where I might hear some of those extra open strings there, I'm keeping my thumb kind of resting almost all the time on those strings. All right, you know, it just depends on the situation. You can't necessarily keep it down all the time, but that's how I'm controlling a lot of noise, and especially if you do start cranking on some distortion, and you know, these notes, you know, open strings can just start ringing on their own as you're all cranked up. So as a noise control factor, I'm just keeping that thumb down. And so, you know, watch my right hand here as I play this ascending again, and then descending. All right. So, you know, it takes a little bit to kind of control noise, but just keep that in mind, is that you want to have your hand very close here. In general, that's where I suggest keeping your right hand, especially if you're playing electric guitar, is your right hand has to control a lot of the excess noise that can happen from strings. And so a lot of times my right hand thumb is touching the strings in different ways as I'm picking to help control that noise. All right, so that's the first thing. Ascending and descending this little sweeping D minor arpeggio. Now the next thing I want you to do is, instead of doing the ascending and then descending kind of separately, is we're going to try to get a fluid motion where you're going to be going up these three notes and down these three notes, kind of all in one motion. All right, see how my right hand is just kind of making this downward motion and then upward motion. And you'll notice, you know, just this is the same thing when you're strumming, is you kind of have to, as I'm doing this downward motion, I do angle the pick a little bit so that the tip is facing the ceiling a little bit, and then as I'm doing the upward motion, my pick is facing a little bit more towards the floor. Not drastic, but just enough to let my pick kind of glide across those strings a little easier. So let's try this where we're going to be sweeping up and then back down on those three notes of that little teeny D minor arpeggio.